Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 4 of the Women Who Power Lunch series. This series is brought to you by the All Me podcast, which features engaging conversations surrounding appearance and performance enhancing substances. You can search Taylor Hootoon or All Me in your favorite podcast platform to learn more. This time, we'd like to introduce our Taylor Hootoon Foundation staff. We have our president, Donald Hootoon. Donald will be leading our Q&A, so if anyone has any questions, please feel free to put those in the chat, and we will answer those at the end of our session. We also have Tavis Piatoli, who is our sports dietitian. Tavis will be assisting with any technical questions that you might have. Just again, feel free to pop those in the chat, and Tavis will respond to you with any assistance needed. And then we have our Director of Education, Brian Parker. And Brian is actually also going to be one of our special guests today. So again, welcome to everyone. Today's topic is appearance and performance enhancing substances, scope, trend, and availability. According to polls, the majority of adults believe that the usage of appearance and performance enhancing substances only takes place in professional sports. This could not be further from the truth. Our goal is always to provide you with information so you can be empowered and enlightened. Today's session is a must for parents, educators, coaches, and other adult influencers. Some of the most common questions we receive are, who is using appearance and performance enhancing substances? What are they using them for? Why are they using them? And how are our youth able to get a hold of these illegal substances? During this episode, our special guests will shed light on these topics and more. Now it's time to meet our guests. Eric Feinberg. Eric has worked in the advertising industry for almost 30 years, working on behalf of Fortune 500 companies, sponsoring major sporting and entertainment events. Eric later started the Global Intellectual Property Enforcement Center, where he developed a patent machine learning tool that relies on artificial intelligence and logic to search and sift through thousands of social media posts. As the Vice President of Content Moderation for a Washington, D.C.-based nonprofit, the Coalition for a Safer Web, Eric works with former Ambassador Mark Ginsburg to shed light on terrorist extremist content, hate speech, violent activity, and illegal drug sales. He has provided expert analysis for media outlets around the world. Eric's process patent technology identified information which led to the anticipation of a threat of violent attacks in Washington, D.C. on January 6th. Welcome, Eric, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Our next guest is Brian Parker, my colleague and THF's very own Director of Education. As the Director of Education, Brian leads and manages the development, promotion, and delivery of THF's All Me Assembly programs. The All Me Assembly programs are delivered at high schools, middle schools, colleges, universities, professional associations, and other venues throughout the U.S., Canada, and Latin America. Brian's leadership has helped the foundation directly reach over 2 million people with our education programs. Prior to joining the Taylor Hootoon Foundation, Brian worked in minor league baseball with the Atlanta Braves organization and the Durham Bulls. As a lifelong sports fan, Brian is committed to educating people on the dangers of appearance and performance enhancing substances, along with encouraging everyone that they can be anything they want to be the right way. Welcome, Brian. We appreciate you serving as one of our guests today.
Happy to be here. Good to see you again, Amy.
Thank you. So Brian, let's go ahead and start and break down the numbers, if you would, please. Can you tell us a little bit about adolescent usage of appearance and performance enhancing substances?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm going to give you a couple of disclaimers before I throw some numbers out to you. Well, first off, I want to thank everybody for joining us. I know Zoom has become almost a bad word at this point, and you clicked on a lot of those links, but you clicked on one more, so we appreciate you for that. Number two, I've been doing this for a while now, going on about a decade, and I've spit these numbers out more times than I can count. And every time I talk about the issue and talk about these numbers, I understand that they start to sound a little bit scary. I can assure you, I've never tried to use any of this as a scare tactic. That's not my goal today by any means. While these numbers do have me worried, I'm not talking about it for that reason. I'm talking about it because I want to highlight the need for education on this topic. And I know we'll get into that, but regardless of who you are on this call, you've got a community, whether that's a team, a family, a school that you work with. I'm just hoping that by highlighting these numbers, we can all be aware of the issues that are at play. And then hopefully this conversation will lead to more conversations down the road. So I always say that just because I don't want to come out the gate and scare people with what I'm doing, right? Saying that, I am going to get a little scary for the moment and give you the numbers that you asked about, Amy. I will start with anabolic steroid numbers. If we want to look at the population as a whole, numbers have told us recently we're looking at about 4 million people that are involved with these drugs. Now, what I want to highlight is really the young people that are getting involved, our students, even focusing down to the high school age group more often than not. If we're going to look at that age group, what we typically see is about 6 to 8%, right? And that number might not sound large to you, but I always look at it this way. Whenever I go speak at a school, about 1 out of every 14 students that I'm looking at have tried anabolic steroids at this point. So that's 1 or 2 in every class. That's 1 or 2 in every team. In my opinion, that's a lot. It's a lot more widespread than people may think. So we've got a large number involved. It's not always who you think they are. We still have tons of males that are involved with this. They probably still remain the largest number of people involved. But we have a lot of females getting involved as well. We'll dive into the reasons on why that is. But there's a lot of different people involved, and it's a much larger number than a lot of people may think.
So, Brian, can you just kind of reiterate for us, what are the average ages of usage of these substances among adolescents?
What we're seeing, the best number I can give you, which is probably a better example than looking at an average, is let's look at when they start. So the average age of initiation is now down to 15 years old. We are literally talking about sophomores in high school. So that is why we've always viewed that age group as incredibly important to talk to, because that is when they're seeing it for the first time. That's when a lot of people are making decisions to get involved for the first time. So we have to talk with that group because that's where the prevention takes place. So unfortunately, starting at about age 15, which is incredibly dangerous for that age group because they're developing. So if we're throwing hormones and drugs into someone at that age, they can be extremely dangerous and powerful because of that.
And you touched on this a little earlier, but can you tell us a little bit more about why are they using them? What are the reasons they're giving for using anabolic steroids?
Yeah, I've talked about this a lot over the course of what I do, because here's what'll happen a lot. I'll call a school, I'll tell them a little bit about the work we do, and they'll want to transfer me straight over to the athletic department, right? Or talk to the AD. I think there's a perception in our society that the main reason why anybody would get involved with anabolic steroids is because they're an athlete. They want to perform better. They want to recover, right? Our society throws this into the athlete side of things. Now, don't get me wrong. There's always going to be athletes involved with this. There's always going to be people looking to get an edge. So I don't want to dismiss that as a high-risk group. But at the end of the day, the number one reason why we're seeing anybody get involved with this is body image. We live in a very body image driven society. All of us are surrounded, but particularly our young people are surrounded by images of quote unquote what we are supposed to look like, right? Social media, magazines, movies, TV, these pictures are all around us. So our young people are getting shown images, oftentimes unrealistic images on what society wants them to be. And in order for them to achieve those goals, they're turning to these drugs. So wanting to change what you look like, wanting to feel better about yourself in some kind of way is the number one reason why anybody's getting involved. And so therefore, when I go talk to a school, I always say, look, I want to talk to everybody there, because body image is a universal pressure. And it's not that I want to dismiss that pressure, but I want to help them navigate that and make the right choices and achieve those physical goals the right way.
So we talked a little bit about anabolic steroids. One of the other substances we're hearing more and more about with adolescent usage is human growth hormone. Can you tell us a little bit about human growth hormone, who's using that, percentage of usage, and just general statistics that you're seeing regarding that substance?
Sure. It's funny because back when I started doing this 10 years ago, and Donald could probably back me up, we didn't talk too much about human growth hormone. It wasn't a drug that we got a lot of questions about. So we didn't spend a lot of time on it. And then I'll say it was probably 6, 7 years ago, we started getting more questions, and we started to understand, all right, this is being used pretty heavily as well. And what we found out based on the latest studies that we've seen, it's actually a higher number of students using HGH at this point than steroids. The last numbers that we were throwing out was around 11%, 10 to 11% of people getting involved with that. So obviously, we're talking about a good number of people involved there. And if we're going to focus on gender with that, about 12% of those users were males, about 9% were females. So again, we've got almost a 50-50 split in regards to males, females getting involved. And that all, of course, centers back to the body image point that we just discussed. So I think a lot of people hear HGH, they think that's kind of a niche drug, or that's anti-aging. Oxymoron, by the way, we can talk about that later, right? But again, we have this perception of athletes use that kind of stuff. It's a lot of young people getting involved, and it's again, it's body image that are driving all these numbers at the end of the day.
And both of these substances that we've just talked about, illegal substances, correct?
Absolutely. So when I talk about these numbers, I'm not talking about people that are getting prescribed this by a doctor. There are obviously legit medical reasons why things like anabolic steroids and human growth hormone exist, right? So focus on this conversation is going to be about those that are using them to get bigger, faster, stronger, change what they look like, not being used with a prescription, oftentimes being bought online, which I know Eric will talk about a little bit later. So yes, we're talking about the illegal use of these substances, not what you'd be given by a doctor.
Thank you. And so, one of the things that you touched on is how these substances have morphed into from just pure performance usage to appearance and performance. Any other trends or changes that you all have seen, in your, recent studies and things on these topics that we should be aware of?
Yeah, there's a few things. Body image is by far the biggest trend. That's what's driving a lot of this. The other big trend, and I'm not going to steal Eric's thunder. I couldn't even if I wanted to. But the other big trend is how they're obtaining this, right? Eric will spend time on that, so I won't focus a lot there, but that's a big trend. I think a couple other things that concern me when it comes to numbers and people are getting involved is some of the stuff I'm seeing happen after they start using it, right? Because what happens is you have people illegally obtaining this stuff. All right, so they don't often know what they've got their hands on. Then they're relying on the internet to figure out how to use it. And so a trend that worries me is, oftentimes people that are using this stuff for the reasons that we're discussing are taking hundreds and hundreds of milligrams at a time, oftentimes more than 500 milligrams, over the course of a day or a week, right? Put that in perspective. If you were given a prescription for the stuff we're talking about, you'd probably be taking 5 to 2 milligrams a day. When we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of milligrams a week, the dangers are just amped up. That's a trend that worries me. Another trend that I'm seeing is that when people are getting involved, it's hard for them to quit. There was a study that just came out where they actually talked to a pretty large number of people that were already involved with anabolic steroids. About half of them said that they tried to quit. Well over 60% of those people that tried to quit actually returned back to using because they were getting addicted to the results that they were seeing, right? So that concerns me. We've got a lot of people getting involved. They don't necessarily know what they're doing, what they're buying. And then once they're in it, it's hard for them to get out. Those are just some of the numbers and trends that I see that have me worried at the end of the day.
We clearly have established that adolescents are using these substances, and usage of these substances is obviously completely preventable. Talk to me a little bit about what percentage of youth indicate that they have been educated on the dangers of these substances.
Yeah, this number, I've thrown this number and stat out so many times I couldn't tell you, but it really, I think it's one of the most important things to discuss because honestly, it's the reason our foundation exists. But about 85% of young people have never had a parent or a coach or a teacher sit them down and educate and talk to them about this stuff. That number is just way too high. I always use myself as an example as often as I can when I do my programs. I can promise you, I was one of those students. I never had anybody pull me aside and talk about this stuff. I was a dare kid growing up. That's probably aging myself a little bit. All right, I won't throw that number out. But when I grew up, people talked to me about drinking. They talked to me about smoking and all kinds of drugs and alcohol, but performance enhancing substances, that was never in the mix, right? I think a lot of that has to do with the fundamental usage reason being very different. A lot of the stuff that we do educate about are escape release drugs. We see our young people out there doing it. The kind of stuff we talk about, it's achievement-based drugs. So people are trying to obtain a goal, but they're doing it behind closed doors. So we're not seeing it happen as much. Therefore, we're not talking about it as much. And what that leads to at the end of the day is just a lack of education. And that's what we're trying to fix by doing calls like this.
Speaking of lack of education, as you indicated, that was why the Hootoon family, formed the Taylor Hootoon Foundation. So can you tell us a little bit about the work the Taylor Hootoon Foundation does, specifically the THF education programs?
Yeah, so, the Taylor Hootoon Foundation is, by name, if we're looking at it that way, is somewhat self-explanatory about why we're here. Everything we're doing, obviously, goes back to Taylor's story. And Taylor was one of those students that didn't have education on this topic, right? So at the core of why we do this, it's obviously we're remembering Taylor, but he was another student that made an uneducated choice because he didn't have the information otherwise, right? And so what happened was, when everything went down with Taylor, we looked around and we noticed that, okay, this is bigger than just that, right? We do have millions of people involved with this stuff, and there was no group out there talking about it. And so the reason why we do the work that we do is there was just a giant gap in education, not only for Taylor, not only for myself, but for millions of young people out there. And so we do what we do to fill a gap in education and a need that we saw that was out there to talk about this more than there was at the time.
Seems like it's filling a void on two fronts, really, from an awareness perspective, because many people, as we mentioned earlier in the program, really believe that this is only taking place at the professional level. So just bringing general awareness that this is taking place with adolescents, and then teaching adolescents and their adult influencers the truths about these substances. So can you tell us a little bit about what age group we educate?
Yeah, so, people always ask me, like, hey, I work with this group. Is this a good fit for what you do? Or like, should I pull in my, they ask me who we should talk to. My simple answer to that question is, I will talk to anybody that'll listen to me. It does not matter to me, demographic, interest, age, backgrounds, genders. This is a topic that affects everybody. I think a lot of that relies on that body image pressure. I do believe that's a pretty universal pressure that all of us feel to some degree or another. So the age group we talk to ranges anywhere from middle school students and all the way up to their adult influencers. We spend a lot of time talking to students, whether that be middle school, a high school, a university, and that's a very important group to talk to because of the prevention that provides. But we also spend a ton of time talking to the people that are with those young people every single day. So we want to talk to parents. We want to talk to athletic trainers and coaches and principals and teachers, because those are the front lines on this issue, right? They are the ones working with our young people day in and day out. So for us, we want to talk to them just as much as the students, because that is what perpetuates this education. That is how we have a conversation that leads to more conversations. So we talk to both sides of that coin, and we talk to all kinds of different ages, because unfortunately this applies to a lot of different groups across the board.
Thank you very much for giving us such a great overview on both the scope and trends of these substances. And, the next question that we get a lot is, so how are students and our adolescents able to access these illegal substances? And that is where our next guest comes in. So Eric, I'd love to turn over to you. And can you just start us off by telling us a little bit about the work that you do?
Yeah, I think the work that I do, and you're right, it's a great segue from Brian, is, Brian touched on why they're using it, and how, we're focused on how they're obtaining it, especially through the internet and through apps now. And I look at it as we've evolved, and the Taylor Hootoon Foundation has involved in a group we both work with, the Digital Citizen Alliance. When we both started here back in like 2010, 11, 12, when this stuff was being illuminated, it was mostly web-based, where you can obtain them. Now, as more and more, it's moved from desktops, Macs, to iPhones, Google phones. It's the apps where these performance enhancement drugs, steroids, HGH, are being promoted and sold, such as Facebook's app, Instagram app, TikTok, Snapchat, and Telegram. So it really is, which is interesting. And I said it's really good to have the segue from what Brian said, how and why they use it, to how they're obtaining them, through mostly now your phone and the apps.
So can you to kind of take us back to the beginning? What first piqued your interest in this topic? When and how did you first realize that there was a problem, just in general? Kind of take us back way to the beginning, where there were problems with things that were being promoted online, and how did you get started?
Well, way to the beginning was sort of a sidebar. I was actually working for the NFL, handling their special events, promoting Pro Bowl, Super Bowl on behalf of the NFL back in 2010, 2011. I was responsible for really introducing part of the NFL to social media. At the time, and this is in late 2011, 2012, when I was promoting the NFL's Pro Bowl and Super Bowl activations, I started noticing that my posts on Facebook were being tagged with sponsored ads for Chinese counterfeit jerseys, $18 jerseys from China. Now, what that led me to believe is that if I'm getting ads based on my preferences for Chinese counterfeit jerseys based on what I'm posting on the NFL, that means my data has to be being shared with China for me to get those jerseys. It's about that time I started seeing the work that Adam and Tom was doing at the Digital Citizens Alliance, and I've reached out to them with some of the work they were doing with steroids. So what I started to do then, just like I created a profile on Facebook, which was for me being an NFL fan and kind of wanting to be an NFL fan, I started developing my profile and my account to start to engage and look at, steroid sellers, promotion of, groups or pages promoting steroids. And lo and behold, within a few days, a few weeks, the algorithm were actually putting in front of me ads and groups and pages offering for sale on Facebook, steroids, HGH, geotropin, humotropin, things like that. So it's sort of what we see, and I've talked about this on a number of times, and Tom and Adam have quoted this at the DCA, the internet and the phone has become your kid's drug dealer. And what makes it worse, the algorithm is actually putting it in front of your child. So in a sense, I'm not searching illegal steroids. The algorithms are putting the illegal steroids in front of me.
So can you tell us a little bit about the Global Intellectual Property Enforcement Center?
Well, we started the Global Intellectual Property Enforcement Center in about 2013, 14, as I said, with a group of people who were concerned. And it really was a house. What my overall goal was, and we did, is to license a patented software we have that thinks beyond AI. Now, what do I mean by thinking behind AI? Artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is very limited. It's static, it's stagnant, it doesn't think. Siri, Alexa is a good example of AI. We took it to the next level and to create a system that has logic. What do I mean by logic? Well, here it's built on an anomaly. Here's an anomaly. You can't sell a prescriptive drug, so it's a geotropin, which is a Pfizer product, and then say no RX needed. That's an anomaly. And then to go and to complete the transaction on WhatsApp, PayPal, whatever. So what we did is basically we built a system that deals with anomalies of things, and you keep feeding the system and telling it, based on what you see, that this is bad, nefarious stuff. And then eventually it gets it to think for itself, and then it brings you back some correlated data. Our overall goal was, and we did have meetings with YouTube, Facebook, Twitter at that time, to license the software to them to act like a blocker filter. Again, you could filter this out. How do you filter it out? You would then build code. If I get too technical here, let me know. You would build a code into their systems that if you had certain things that say geotropin, no RX, complete the transaction with WhatsApp, the system would know that's nefarious, illegal, and that wouldn't get posted. Lo and behold, though, if you know how these companies are about, it's all about their algorithms and building market share and audiences, and they want to know part of it. A few years ago, I was approached, as you said, by Ambassador Mark Ginsburg when he created the Coalition for Safer Web. And when we put this together, and a lot of what we illuminate here is the use of this technology to show a lot of the things we show based on the sale of illicit drugs and of course, what we just talked about on terrorism and extremism, based on what we call this anticipatory logic.
And can you share with us a little bit about some of the things you have uncovered, both with illicit drug sales, but also just other things in general?
Yeah, we've exposed, and it's well documented. Of course, we've done multiple reports with the Digital Citizens Alliance on the sale of, steroids, HGH, opioids, Xanax, that whole field. And of course, a lot of work's been done on our work on exposing international terrorism such as ISIS, Al Qaeda, and of course, the rise of white supremacy in this country and the use of these social media platforms, to embolden these people, QAnon, Proud Boys, militias, which, as you said, we kind of anticipated there was going to be violence in Washington around the time of the Capitol back in January.
So back to appearance and performance enhancing substances, can you tell us, I know you touched a little bit on it, but just as a reminder, some of the substances that are being sold that are specifically appearance and performance enhancing substances online?
Yeah, I mentioned the HGH, the branding, geotropin, which is Pfizer, Humatrope, which is Lilly, testosterone, peptides, HGH, steroids unto itself. And then, what is it? Chlamydia, something, Clomid, the one that take it's estrogen that brings you down. So we see that. And again, which is scary, is a lot of this is coming from China and the Balkan states, which are notorious as there was a thing, an article a few months ago was written, and we said is basically called the Balkan Mafia, which, groups out of the Balkan states there, the Ukraine, literally selling online these, performance enhancing drugs to unsuspecting Americans. And China, there's a group out of China that is chemical companies. These chemical companies are literally, for us, in plain sight on Facebook, selling literally what we would say poison, with, somatrope. Somatrope's one that comes to mind. That literally is right in front of you. Who knows what goes into this from China? The most interesting thing, what I see, is the use of these platforms to actually communicate to people when these lots are being shipped. So literally, you could see on Facebook and Twitter from these Chinese chemical companies selling, steroid-based or HGH products, who bought them and how they're being shipped via FedEx, DHL, et cetera. So they're operating in plain sight. And if not for our efforts, DCA, your efforts with them, a lot of times I share this with the government agencies, and I'm telling them stuff they don't know, like the FDA OCI, and not their fault. And I'm sure you can attest to it with the AA. These companies, because this stuff's so new and it pivots so much so fast, these government agencies who are supposed to be responsible for this, they just don't have the budget, and they're not equipped to move or see it as fast as we can while this is going on. And you continue to hear the rhetoric from the social media companies, even after, the DCA and Coalition for Safer Web put out these great 60, 70-page reports on this. You would think that at the very least, they would look at the reports and make some effort to reduce or eradicate this from their platforms. And it's nothing. You could still go on right now. A lot of things that we've been putting these reports dating back to 2018 are still on the platforms that you can find illegal steroids and illegal drugs.
It's been established clearly that the sale of illegal substances is taking place online. And as you mentioned earlier, that the drug dealers are now on our cell phones. Can you just give specifically where someone may be finding these substances, just so that we can establish how rampant and widespread the availability of these substances is?
It's on Snapchat, TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. A lot. We're finding a lot in Instagram because of the use, especially what a hashtag is, the ability to queue it and find it. There's a tremendous amount of activity on Instagram, with hashtags such as on steroids, HGH. If you know the brand name, like I said, geotropin, which is Pfizer, Humatrope, which is Lilly, you literally could go and just type that hashtag into the search engine. You can find all these accounts selling. Same thing with TikTok, same thing with Snapchat. You can also do that, of course, Facebook and Twitter and YouTube. If you go onto YouTube, you can actually find videos on actually too the drugs and how to inject them. They actually have injective, ones on how to inject it, whatever. And also, if you'd like to, the ingredients so you can make it yourself. Where to access the ingredients is on YouTube. How-to guides.
And are these sellers putting any type of age restrictions on purchasing these substances?
No. Yeah, the only thing where it's gotten now is it's evolved. What I've noticed the changes originally was credit card, PayPal. Now, and there's the other, evil thing, way of these nefarious activities. A lot of it's now being done with Bitcoins, which makes it really hard to track. So they've evolved too. As technology has evolved, so as the nefarious sellers have evolved.
So a 15 or 16-year-old young person could go online, whether it's social media or Google search, and they could have some of these substances delivered straight to their door.
Yep. And that's the other thing. The use of this a lot of times is through US mail, FedEx, DHL. And as I told you, a lot of times these accounts, especially out of China, use their Facebook pages to actually post. So they'll tag people like, on Facebook tagging who's bought it, that you be aware your shipment's on its way. I've seen that.
So Eric, I'm going to kind of add an additional question here. So how is this allowed? This is clearly illegal activity. Can you just kind of shed a little light on how this continues to go on and how it continues to stay so rampant and obviously growing as well?
Lack of oversight from Washington, lack of vision from Washington, including an antiquated law from 1996 called the Communications Decency Act that gives these platforms immunity. Basically, they're not responsible for the content on these platforms, and that's the immunity. It came about because of the growth in the internet, what they wanted to do in 1996 when we were all using AOL and Netscape, which was basically, I would call a static bulletin board. What's evolved now, and the analogy I use is back in 1996, yes, AOL, Netscape, what we had then was the bulletin board. But because of the algorithm that actually puts this in front of you or knows what you're doing based on your behavior to recommend this, the bulletin board has become not only the bulletin board, the paper, tack, and the pen. And that's where I think, it needs to change. And I think it's, important thing we could educate people. And I think, I'll mention this, on this today, if anybody's listening, you really should be contacting the congressman and senator to do more when it comes to the revision of this Section 230 immunity from the Communications Decency Act of 1996.
We've talked about what substances are available. We've talked about, how readily available they are. But let's now also talk about the potential dangers in addition to them just being illegal substances. Let's just talk about where are these substances coming from and who is manufacturing them? Like
I said, China, and a lot of it's coming from China and the Balkan states. A lot of it's come from China and Mexico too. Some of it too might be, there is another form of this, what I would call diverted merchandise of legitimate products such as Pfizer Geotropin or Lilly Homotrope that is not made for US consumption. So we have here, of course, the FDA, other countries where this comes from, because these pharmaceutical companies are worldwide. So you might be getting this, that it might be okay in countries that does have the stringent testing like we do with the FDA. So it could be coming in from Greece. I've seen it, India, Mexico, which is also, possibly not as tight as the product we get here. So there's a diversion of this content from these other countries.
So an additional information that adults or parents and adult influencers should be aware of is just knowing that these substances could be very dangerous and not even maybe what's being, said that's being sold. It could be a different type of substance possibly as well.
Yeah, because it's not made to US FDA stand. Just like we went through with the COVID vaccine and had to go through FDA testing, there's different standards in different countries around, especially when you get into some of these cusp third world countries like India, Pakistan, Philippines, these countries, it might be a Pfizer or, Lilly product, but it's not met that product to FDA standard. The ingredients might be different there as opposed to what a legitimate geotropin or humotrope product sold here in the United States, even though it's Pfizer and Lilly. And again, you can find them by the hashtag geotropin or homotrope or HGH.
In 2000, and you referenced this a little earlier, but in 2019, you worked on a project with Washington, D.C. based Digital Citizens Alliance, which is a consumer-focused group whose mission is to raise awareness among the public and policymakers about how to make the internet safer. And you released a report titled Digital Platforms on Steroids: How Facebook and Google Enable the Sales of Illegal Appearance and Performance Enhancing Drugs. Can you tell us what prompted the investigation and report?
Well, it's the continued work we do. We do at Coalition and Facebook Web and the Digital Citizens Alliance, that we constantly want to go back and do these reports. We actually updated it this year with Digital Weeds in March 2021. And we want to see, as I said, that we continue to put this information out there. And we want to see if, as we continue to put it out there, other social media companies at least taking our advice and going in and making some effort to reduce and eradicate the use of these platforms to the sale of illegal steroids and drugs. And obviously they're not. That's why we do. We kind of update it to see what we've done prior. I mean, Digital Citizens Alliance started back in 2012, 2013. I think they've done things with the Taylor Hootoon Foundation. I started about the same time. We've kind of connected together about that time. And when we've kind of worked together, and these reports are really like an audit to see if any progress was made. And obviously it hasn't, because again, where's the incentive for these companies do anything? Because they're shielded because of Section 230.
And I believe, did an ad possibly pop up on your social media surrounding our All-Star Gala, the Taylor Hootoon Foundation All-Star Gala?
It said suggested steroid page. Like I said, because that's the algorithm, because I'm engaging with you. And yes, that suggested pages. It happens right now. I log on to Facebook. When they have there the bar suggested groups or they're constantly suggesting for me to follow steroid pages. Same thing on Instagram. When I go into Instagram, the algorithm, I'm having steroid sellers who are initially following me. So they follow my Instagram account because the algorithm is telling them to follow this Instagram I have, that again, I'm interested in steroids. So they start following me. And then they reach out to me, and this is the danger. The direct messaging application is very dangerous because they reach out to me a lot of times saying, hey, I see you got an interest in steroids, drugs. What can I do? You interested? Would you like to? We have everything. What do you want?
And someone may not even need to be searching for these substances to be approached.
Yeah. One other thing that I know, this is coming from overseas. A lot of times the dollar amounts are to the right of the number. So it'd be like $180, the dollars to the zero, not to the left, which makes me believe that it's overseas. This is a tactic used, especially out of China, that they put the dollar amount afterwards, which leads me to believe it's from China. I saw the same thing when I started with the counterfeit jerseys. It was always like 18 and then the numerical sign. Leads me to believe it's from China.
So can you share with our listeners what you and Digital Citizens Alliance did regarding the report? Can you kind of just walk us through the steps that you took as part of the information that you provided for the report, from reaching out to these dealers and kind of that process?
I handed it over to Tom and Adam, and they did the buy. It was a group out of China. I think it was called Somatropin, which has many Facebook pages and groups. And Adam and Tom did the buy. They actually bought it. And I think what we found out is that it wasn't whatever they were selling. I don't think when they took it to a chemist, I think it was a lot of air. There was nothing to it. It wasn't really substance. So obviously what they're promising is the other danger, that it wasn't a deliverable, what we call steroid product. That's the other danger you have, is not only that you're interacting for the sale of the product, you're giving your personal information to these nefarious actors. Who knows what they're doing? Your name, address, phone number, and sometimes credit card information.
Yes, I believe they purchased two different substances, one that did test positive and one that, as you mentioned, was an unidentified substance.
Yeah.
So both examples scary. One that someone can purchase an illegal substance online, but then even scarier to be purchasing substances that are not identifiable. So once they went through that process and they were able to verify that they had purchased these substances, they had them tested, what were the next steps once they learned all of that information? What next steps did you all take?
I'm not sure what next steps. I think we put out the report and we reached out to it. I know we've shared this, with the FDA. The platforms have seen it, but really the next step is for what my efforts are. What we're trying to do is get the platforms, Google, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, to eradicate or reduce this. That's really what we're trying to do here. It's not so much where it comes, and that's their part of what we do together is the testing of the product. My efforts are part of this partnership we have is really to show how widespread this is and that no action's been taken. Again, we've done, 2000, you referred to the 2019 report. We backed it up in March of 2021 with the same report, and nothing's been done either based on the 2019 report or the 2021 report. You can still readily find these on the platforms.
What is the platform's reaction when you bring this information to them?
They take down what we give them. They have to, and usually it comes through the press, whether it's through the Washington Post. I know ABC. We've done stuff. And that's what they take action on when we give it to them. There's no effort made on their own to go into their own platforms and snuff out what's there, which you haven't told them. So you can still go on right now. And these platforms, and again, the algorithms are pushing it, still going on, no change. So the only way they take activity is when we share the individual links with them that we want to share with them, but the ones we don't share and the ongoing activity, no effort's been made to eradicate or reduce the use of the platforms, including the algorithmic amplification we discussed prior.
What are some of the challenges that continue even when the accounts or sites are identified as illegal sites and taken down?
They keep coming back. And that's why I said what you have to do, and that's what my patent's on, behavioral logic. What you have to do is build logic and continuing evolve that logic. When again, anomaly, geotropin, no RX, buy it with a Bitcoin. That's anomaly. You don't buy a prescriptive drug without an RX, and you don't complete the transaction through Bitcoin. You can literally build code or blocks into the platforms to block that or sandbox or put in a queue for review. That's really how to get it to the root of the problem. We understand the logic. They're not using that. So what they're doing is just a giant game of whack-a-mole. So today you have an account called Geotropin 1, take Geotropin 1 down, next generation 2 comes up, keep popping up again, because what they don't understand, these platforms, and they haven't built it in to their AI systems, is to understand the logic behind it. That's what we've done with this patented system through GuidePEC that we're using at the Coalition for a Safer Web. It's the logic. Nuance.
What steps should we as internet users take if we find and or are solicited by an illegal ad or site?
Don't engage with it. And I think in some regards, if parents are listening or kids, don't engage with it and really have a talk with your children about what we're discussing today, especially with the use of cell phone, smartphones. And I would too monitor, what your kids are interacting with through the smartphones.
Are there ways that we can also report these sites as internet users?
You could. I've reported them to the platforms. I think they're making so much money, stock prices are through the roof, all this. They literally have just turned a blind eye. I mean, that's the other thing too. They have these reporting systems that you're supposed to take action on them. They literally take no action. In fact, last year during the height of the pandemic, I was testing it. I reported these and I have records of it to Facebook, but I got replies back is because of the pandemic, we're short staffed and can't act on it right away, using their own reporting systems.
Can you share with us what we can do as parents and adult influencers to help keep the internet as safe as possible for our youth?
I think interacting with your congressman, senator, and being more vocal on that end to pass laws and take away the immunities and hold these platforms accountable. The other thing I've been working on and trying to do, unfortunately, and we've done a lot of work on this, trying to get brands and advertisers who support these platforms. And they're well aware, brands and advertisers are well aware this activity is going on, and they do nothing, and they continue to support these platforms. And I think it's time where corporate America, and especially some of your sponsors, Major League Baseball, some of the sponsors of Major League Baseball should start putting the pressure on these platforms that if you don't clean this up, we're going to pull our ads, but more importantly, possibly, maybe it's time that the public starts boycotting some of these corporate entities that are advertising on these platforms while this activity is going on.
Thank you, Eric, for your wonderful overview, just educating all of us on what we should be looking for, how we should be protecting our kids so that we know that this is going on so that we can ensure that our kids are having a safer internet experience. Brian, I'm going to switch gears back to you. The sole purpose of the Taylor Hootoon Foundation is to enlighten the world to the truths about appearance and performance enhancing substances through education and awareness, such as sessions like this. Can you please share with us some examples of how our education is impacting and changing lives?
Yeah, of course. I could give you lots of stories. I'll try to pick a couple. Maybe next Power Lunch we'll do a story time with Brian, and I'll give you everything that I got. But yeah, a couple ways, that come to mind for me. I'll talk first in a general sense, and then I'll kind of fall back on a personal story that stuck with me. But a lot of what I do when I'm not out traveling or on the road or doing Zoom meetings and doing the programs is trying to find places for us to do programs and find schools for us to go into. And so what happens a lot is, I reach out to people and they kind of assume that this isn't a problem, right? It falls back to some of the things I talked about at the very beginning. They just don't see it happening a lot. So they think that it's not an issue they need to address. And one of the impacts that I see happen the most is the change of opinions before and after we do calls like this, before and after we do our program. Best example I can give of that, we've had a really strong partnership up in the state of Rhode Island. We work with a couple of groups up there, the Rhode Island Foundation and the Rhode Island Interscholastic League. We have all come together to provide education to every group, every school you can imagine in the state of Rhode Island. We started that partnership, I want to say 8 years ago. And in year one, we didn't know what that was going to look like. We didn't know if schools would be on board. We didn't know how many presentations we'd be able to do. We didn't know if people would even bring us in. Here we are, fast forward 8 years later. Not only did people bring us in that were maybe hesitant at the beginning, we have had schools bring us in 8 years running now because they now see the value and the impact this education, this awareness can have. So I think that's one of the biggest impacts that stick with me is just, when we're done, when we have calls like this and people realize the amount of people we have involved, where this stuff is coming from, it just opens eyes. And from a general sense, I think that's why education is so important. To tie back to a personal story that I promised you, man, there's lots of things that have stuck with me over the past 10 years that I've done this. One that really moved me, and I won't use names or locations or anything, but I spoke at a university. This was probably 3 or 4 years ago. And every time I speak, I always tell them that, look, I'll be the last person out of the room because I want to talk with young people after I'm done. But I was hanging out and the room slowly started to clear out. And one young lady stood behind. And after everybody was done, she started walking down the stairs and was crying. Came up to me and got the courage to tell me a story about a friend of hers in high school that had used anabolic steroids and, similar to Taylor, had also took his own life. And she had never been able to share that. She just couldn't get the strength and which is understandable to talk about that with others. And she came up to me and said, because of what I sat through today and because of the work you're doing, I'm not going to share my friend's story, in hopes of preventing this for others. And I think that sticks with me because that's at the core of what we're doing. I look at people like Donald and Don and Gwen every day, and I admire the strength that it takes for them to tell Taylor's story, but I know why they do it, because I've been doing it too. It's the impact that those kind of stories have, and that education can have at the end of the day. So that's why I think this is so important for not only the programs that we do, but just for calls like this.
Thank you, Brian. We're going to switch over to our Q&A portion. And Donald, I believe you had received a question beforehand. If you would like to go ahead and ask that.
Absolutely. And the question goes to Eric. And because knowing what the topic is, Eric, so what should somebody call and say, like, how would they approach their local congressman, to encourage them to focus on Section 230? What sort of, I guess, layman's term, if you will, what questions should they ask, or what should they say to do to encourage them to look at Section 230 seriously, letting them know that this is a problem and something that they should be looking at?
I think, well, number one, our reports are already available online and what we're doing here. And I think it would be important for them to use, your research, the Alliance research, our research, and just go to the Congress people with these reports we put out in the news stories. That's why we do it. We do this work, which is over a long period of time, hundreds and hundreds of hours of manpower on mine, Adam, your part, to put these reports out. And I think they should, rely on and use the reports we've done when approaching the Congress people, and sessions like this. It's in the newspaper. You can just go. That's what we continue to hope that why we do these reports, why we put out a press release and reach out to major news sources like ABC News, Washington Post, New York Times, whatever. We hope that people see it and rely on these reports when they approach the congressman and exist.
Yeah, one of the things that we can do, Eric, is we'll also put a link to your website as well as a link to the report in the show notes. So when it's viewed on YouTube and people see us discussing this, they can quickly glance down at the show notes and find out how to download those reports.
Yeah, that's why what you're doing is great. We need to educate. That's why what you're doing here is, a fantastic idea to educate more and more.
Yeah, thank you.
In addition to including it in the show notes, Eric, could you maybe also just inform everyone how they can learn more about you or where they can reach you?
Yeah, our website's coalitionsw.org. Coalition Safer Web, but it's coalitionsw.org, and that's how they can do it. And of course, if you want to see the work you can do, you can Google sale of illegal steroids, Coalition Safer Web, Digital Citizens Alliance, and a lot of our reports that we've done and the news stories on this readily available online.
Thank you. And Brian, if someone would like more information in general or to schedule an All-Me assembly, where should they go?
The easy answer to that is you're looking at it. I'm more than happy to get you all the information you would want on this kind of stuff. I do not hide when it comes to this. It's hard for me to hide physically. I'm 6'6", so I don't hide anyways. But when it comes to this, I never shy away from contact or getting a hold of anyone. I am very easy to get a hold of when it comes to the programs that we do, to the education that we provide. I will put my direct email in the chat. Outside of that, our website is a tremendous resource. It's simply taylorhootoon.org. There's a page there dedicated simply to the variety of educational programs that we provide, and a way that you can get a hold of us there. So I'll put my info down in the chat, but also check out our website. I've got all the information you would need. If you're a group out there, whoever you are, we'd love to work with you in any capacity.
Thank you so much. And if anyone would like to hear a deeper dive into Eric and the work that he does, we would encourage you to go back and listen to episode 4 of the All-Me podcast. All you have to do is search Taylor Hootoon or All-Me in your favorite podcast platform, and then just go to episode 4. Again, would really like to thank our special guests, Eric and Brian, not only for coming today, but for all the work that you do to continue educating and enlightening the world to the truths about appearance and performance enhancing substances. And to all of our viewers, thank you so much for joining us today. As a reminder, this session will be available on our Taylor Hootoon Foundation YouTube library. And we hope that you will join us next month for episode 5, which will take place on September 29th. Thank you so much again, and have a great day.